Welcome to the Forged by Trust podcast. I'm your host, Robin Dreeke, former U.S. Marine, spy recruiter, best-selling author, and your trust and communication expert. Today's episode, Be a Changemaker, is brought to you by my guest, Deke Copenhaver, and all he has to offer. Deke Copenhaver is a best-selling author, leadership coach, podcast coach, management consultant, and keynote speaker. He's driven by a passion for helping individuals and organizations who want to have a positive impact on the world around them. If he can be of service to you, please contact him at me@dekecopenhaver.com and check out his links in the show notes. Coming up next on the Forged by Trust podcast.
Good leadership is about making people feel safe, secure, and that their voices are heard and that they matter. For me, it's just not black and white. It's how do you solve the problem? How do you mix the colors together? So transparency builds trust. So if we focus on those common ground issues, even if they're traumatic experiences, I think we can have more empathy towards each other. But I think sometimes to seek common ground, and it's what I've done my entire adult life, you have to become the common ground.
Welcome to the show. I'm Robin Dreeke, and on the Forged by Trust podcast, we decode the interpersonal communication skills of the world's most acclaimed forgers of trust. We unlock the skills and techniques from spies, spy recruiters, master interrogators, globally recognized behavioral experts, C-suite executives, entrepreneurs, acclaimed authors, and thought leaders. Each episode provides specific actions that you can immediately apply to any aspect of your personal or professional life. Today's episode, Be a Changemaker, is with my good friend, former non-politically affiliated mayor of Augusta, Georgia, and changemaker, Deke Copenhaver. Deke Copenhaver currently serves as principal of Copenhaver Consulting, LLC, a niche consulting firm in Augusta, Georgia, serving the needs of businesses, nonprofits, and local governments. He's a keynote speaker, executive coach, and host of the Changemaker podcast. Mr. Copenhaver is the author of the Forbes Books Amazon #1 bestseller, The Changemaker, The Art of Building Better Leaders. In 2022, he became a founding partner with Starts With Us, a newly established national nonprofit with a focus on creating a movement to foster curiosity, compassion, and courage as daily habits to overcome the polarization, blind tribalism, and dehumanization threatening the social fabric of our communities. Deke served as mayor of Augusta, Georgia from 2005 through 2014 with a strong focus on diversity and inclusion in a comprehensive approach to economic development and neighborhood revitalization initiatives. During the episode today, we talk about creative problem solving, integrity in politics, how to keep going after tragic loss, becoming the common ground, and being a change maker. All right, good morning, Deke. How are you?
I'm good. How are you?
I am fantastic. Let's kick the show off here. These titles are fascinating to me when we come up with them because I think they really tell a story about where we are today, but understanding where someone comes from is even more interesting, kind of to give it context. And Changemaker. It's such a simple word, and you combined change maker into one word, Changemaker. And I thought, wow, Deke is a change maker. So how does someone become a change maker? Because I think a lot of people in the world today would love to be a change maker and know where that journey starts.
You know, my life has taken a very circuitous path. I was in banking when I first got out of college, then went into real estate and development.
Oh, I'm horrible at this. I love interrupting. I'm so sorry. Where'd you grow up and where'd you go to college?
Okay. I was born in Montreal, Canada, and moved to Augusta when I was 4, went to the University of Georgia, got my degree from Augusta University.
Now I'm going to keep backing up here. It's my horrible way. So you moved there when you're 4. What brought that change at 4 years old?
So I guess I've always been a part of change. My father was the vice president of a company in Canada called Celanese, and he was offered CEO positions in New York and Chicago, and actually had taken the job in Chicago, but he and my mother grew up in Virginia, and so they really didn't want us to grow up in a big city, and a position as CEO of a company called Columbia Nitrogen came available here in Augusta, and so he decided to take that so that we wouldn't grow up in a big city.
Nice. All right. Thank you for the backstory. All right. So you grew up down in Georgia, a small town, medium town. What do you think it was?
It was a small town when I moved here, but it's a little over 200,000 people. So mid-sized city.
And what kind of things were you into growing up?
I played golf. I played tennis. I wrote poetry. I took art lessons, so I painted. And so our parents gave us, my sister and I, really exposure to so many different things. I was into sports, music, hunting, just whatever. I like to try everything.
Wow. So poetry, art,
Yeah.
hunting, music. You are a Renaissance man. I didn't even know it. What was the inspiration to do art and poetry? And what kind?
I've been writing poetry my entire life. And I actually grew up wanting to be a writer and, then sort of put those dreams on hold. But I'd learned really rhyme schemes from reading Dr. Seuss when I was a kid. So it really started. I mean, I was writing poetry from the time I was 6 years old.
Oh my gosh, what were you writing it about?
Oh gosh, everything under the sun. And it's been really wonderful for me to have that gift. So each year for Christmas or on many Christmases for family and friends, I'll write people their individual poem and have it framed. And they make cool gifts, but it's a God-given ability. And I think, we're to use the gifts that God has given us. But I shared with people that it's interesting having an arts education taught me creative problem solving. And so that was something that I used in the mayor's office for 9 years. It was never, for me, it's just not black and white. It's how do you solve the problem? How do you mix the colors together? So having that creative side, I used my creative brain every day when I was in office and every day in general.
What a beautiful gift you gave people and still do with poetry. So when you're writing poetry and you're thinking of the individual you're writing it for, does it require you to really observe them in life and give it context? I mean, what's your process for doing poetry for someone?
It does. And I'm like you, I'm very curious, but at first I didn't think it was a great thing, but now I'm sort of the go-to for writing people's obituaries.
Ooh,
And I always try to really, I meet with the family and I just try to capture the person. And
right.
that's sort of what I would do writing a poem for somebody, just to capture their essence.
So from a very young age, you were a non-judgmental observer of people to see who they were, to capture that. That's pretty amazing.
Very much so. And in writing my book, you do a lot of introspection, but I realized that moving to the deep South as a 4-year-old kid, painfully shy with a thick Canadian accent, I knew what it was like to feel like an outsider.
Right.
And so I've always wanted to be inclusive in everything I've done. And I think that, you know, to come into that situation at a formative age and being vulnerable made me really appreciate vulnerability, but it connects you with people. And my shyness, what I thought was a weakness is actually a strength because as I mentioned, I love sports, music, but I figured the more I could learn about any given topic to where I could have a conversation with somebody I met and express a genuine interest and curiosity in the things they were interested in, it got me beyond my shyness.
Absolutely. What age did you start discovering that?
Really early on, 4 or 5 years old.
So at 4 or 5 years old, you realized that in order to start forging trust and bonds, you needed to understand the priorities and interests of others.
Yes, which is
Wow.
which is interesting, but it is such a blessing and a gift, and I understand that.
Yes.
And each day I pray and I say, Lord, I know that what connects me to your people is not my appearance, is not my perceived station in life, is not my possessions. It's the spirit that you put within me, and help me always to remember that. But it's interesting how easily I can connect with people.
And it's it's no mystery though. I mean, you just hit it right there. When you are talking in terms of the priorities, challenges, and pain points of others and curious about them without judging them, who doesn't want that person in their life? Because we all just want our self-opinion validated and to be valued. And you give that such great gift, and then you put that gift in writing. I mean, geez, I can't believe how young you were doing that. That is at an age when people typically are exceptionally self-centered because of our insecurities, and you were spiking on it, having moved at such a young age and wanting to fit in, but some switch turned on in you that said, in order to be liked and accepted, I have to make it about others. What a great gift.
Exactly. And, it's interesting. After my book came out, I was doing an interview on a TV show here. And the interviewer, who's a friend of mine, said, "You talk so much about vulnerability in your book. Is it possible to be a politician and be vulnerable?" And I was like, "Yeah, absolutely." And he said, but all the time?" I said, "Yes, that's what connected me to the people I served,
Yeah.
is that I was vulnerable and I was not above them. I was shoulder to shoulder with them. And I didn't say I had all the answers, because nobody has all the answers.
So we have the understanding, the origin story of your superhero backstory, which is incredible. And so you go to college, and where do you go to college?
Went to the University of Georgia
All right.
at
Studied.
17 years old, and had a difficult time finding my way to class, and was asked to leave Georgia. Well, it wasn't really a request, 3 times. And
What was your
tell
distraction,
people,
Deke?
yeah, I tell people, but I learned more about diplomacy and negotiating by talking my way back into school than I ever learned in any class. But finally, I said, I've just got to get my degree. So I came back to Augusta University and got my degree in political science.
Why did they ask you to leave, if I may ask?
Grades.
Yeah. Well, we have a lot in common there. The Naval Academy asked me to leave about 4 times too, and I had to talk my way back to convince, to inspire them to keep me.
Well, it does teach you, as a teenager, having to meet with the dean of the business school to talk your way back in. And I'm sure, the upper people that you were meeting with, it really, it's a humbling experience, but it's a great
Oh, yeah.
learning experience.
If you can start having those humbling experiences when you're younger and own it and not feel like a victim, it really helps propel you forward. What do you think was your main distraction back then?
Oh, probably girls and beer.
Uh,
The typical teenage distraction.
there you go. That's right. So you major in political science, you leave college eventually successfully, very good. So what was the next step in the path?
I went into banking with Nations Bank in Atlanta, what's now Bank of America. And you know, I figured, well, I'll go to Atlanta, I'll go to work for a bank, I'll get married, have 2.5 kids, house with a picket fence, none of which was God's plan for me, for sure.
What was the next plan?
So then I did get married and moved to Beaufort, South Carolina, and got into real estate and development down there. Was a partner in the Sotheby's firm down there.
So I'm curious. You start out in banking, you get into real estate, and you have these massive interpersonal skills. Where was the connection for you? What was the draw for those industries for yourself?
Well, banking was just sort of, that's what everybody did, I
Right.
thought. Real estate, I love property. And I had a rule of thumb that basically I would never sell something to anybody that I wouldn't buy myself.
Mm-hmm.
And property in the Low Country is so beautiful, and the historic property. So I loved it. And to me, I took those negotiating skills into politics, because, and this is, politics have gotten so ridiculous, but in real estate, to consummate the transaction, you'd have to sit down at the negotiating table and have a meeting of the minds. And I always focused on win-win situations where everybody got up from the table feeling like they won. And that really seemed to work. I had a successful run in real estate, but it just, that's the biggest purchase most people will ever make. And putting a smile on people's faces, and they're buying a new home, or they're buying a piece of beautiful property. That's a cool experience.
It's really interesting to hear you say that you loved property and selling property. What I'm hearing you say before that, because you said it, was that I love selling and giving something beautiful to someone, and you're making them happy. So again, you're going back to the art of seeing beauty and the interpersonal side of wanting to be a resource for people and give them something beautiful. I mean, you've been doing that your entire life, just it's manifesting in the way of property in that instance. That's
It
remarkable.
it is, and it's, everything I do has a service aspect to it.
Yes.
And I just, there are people that, don't want to leave a penny on the table, and there are people that have bad business practices who make tons of money. But I'm like, if I had to sacrifice, go against my character to get ahead in business and politics or anything else, I don't want to succeed that way. I could never feel good about doing that.
Sounds like you're pretty solid on your personal brand. Do you know what it is? What is it?
I I would think it's integrity, and that's interesting that we don't associate that with politics these days, but that's what and being a uniter and not a divider. That's just what I've done with every platform I've had to work with.
And so you've teased it really well throughout this. And this is very unique for my audience because I've never had anyone that's been in politics, at least openly, on my show before. And it's because Deke has a very different way he did politics. Luckily, the way Georgia and where he lived works. So, Deke, what got you into wanting to be involved in politics, and then share what made you very unique in that?
It's interesting you should ask that because it's a good story. So unfortunately, my first wife took her own life when I was living in Beaufort. So I met my now wife of 23 years. We'd known each other since high school. And so we married and I moved back to Augusta. She's born and raised in Augusta.
Deke, that's a profound thing. How old were you when she took her life?
I was 29. So my mother passed a week after my 25th birthday with cancer, and lost my first wife, at the age of 29. So by the time, I was 30 years old, I was a widower and had lost my mother.
I'm just speechless by that experience. What did you do? How did you move on?
I will tell you, I called my father and said, I don't think I'm going to be able to get through this. But, through friends, family, through just my wonderful support system, I was able to. And my wife and my current wife had been friends for years. We started dating and she was so patient. I was just like, I'm not ready. I've got to deal with this. And so, but when the time was right, I asked her to marry me and we got married, and I moved back to Augusta. And so it's one of the things that, and I hope it's reflected in my book, that you can get through everything. And I'm like, I didn't just survive, significant losses in my 20s. I went on to have a successful career in any number of things, but I'm like, you have to keep going. And I think I was thinking about it, Robin, you'll appreciate this. I was telling my wife last weekend, I'm like, I think God has taken every one of my 54 years to prepare me to do what I'm doing now. And so going through loss in my 20s gave me so much more empathy for people who are, considering taking their own lives. I mean, I've talked a lot of people out of that, but it gives you that empathy and that compassion. Same thing, losing my mom at an early age. Those things, if moments like that, can be used to build yourself as a person, or they can destroy you. And so for me, when I talk about mental health issues, which I do that a lot, I can speak from personal experience. And what with the lockdowns and everything, what I just think the long-term mental health impact of COVID, particularly on young people, is going to be so damaging. But for me to get people to open up, I have to be vulnerable and share with them the experience that I had going through that.
No doubt. So, Deke, back then, I don't imagine you knew what to do. You were just doing to try to survive that. In hindsight, since you appear to be extremely self-aware and reflective, what do you think was the first thing that you were able to do to start moving forward again?
Oh gosh.
If you can pinpoint it. I know it's a tough question.
No, well, but you have to go through the grieving process.
A lot of people listening have trauma. They've been through
Yeah.
things, or they're going through things right now. I'd love to see if you could give them a starting point to say, hey, all right, I've been there. I was in your shoes. Start with this.
I would say don't be afraid to grieve. And you've got it, it is a process, but grieving is the first step. And I think a lot of people would just want to, well, I want to move beyond this. I'm going to throw myself completely into my job. But people would tell me, you're handling this so well. And I'm like, man, yeah, you don't see me sitting on my stairs in my house, bawling my eyes out every night.
Right.
But I think that going through the grieving process, and God bless my current wife, Melissa, for her to allow me to go through that process until I was ready to get married again. God bless her. She is an unbelievable woman, but it is, don't be afraid to grieve, and don't be afraid to get help either. I saw a lady that Lynette Sanders Robinson, I went to counseling with her. She helped get me through it. So don't be afraid to seek help as well. And I think it's, so many people want to think that that's weakness to seek help. It is not at all. And I would say to anybody, in listening to this, you're not alone either. It's so easy when you're dealing with, traumatic situations to feel like you're the only one. I'd use them as common ground issues. I'm like, okay, I know mental health issues have impacted every family in some way, shape, or form, everyone. So can't we have empathy towards each other around that issue? Cancer, losing my mom to cancer. There is not anybody I know whose life has not been impacted in some way, shape, or form by cancer. So if we focus on those common ground issues, even if they're traumatic experiences, I think we can have more empathy towards each other.
Absolutely. Well, thank you for framing your amazing context and background. So bring us up to politics. What got you involved in politics?
Politics. So I moved back to Augusta. I was in real estate, but then I ran a land trust for 4 years. And we handled the city green space program, which is a land buying program. I was the first executive director of the land trust. I'd learned about land conservation living in Beaufort. But when I first came back to Augusta, I'm like, oh my gosh, we've got a minor league hockey team. We've got all this. Looks great. And then I saw the politics and I'm like, oh my gosh, this is absolutely ridiculous. So in handling the green space program for 4 years, I was able to build consensus around that issue. We built one of the finest programs in the nation on our elected body. And I went through a program called Leadership Georgia in 2004. And for a year, I went around the state of Georgia. We looked at what cities were doing good, bad, but everywhere I went, people were talking about what is up with Augusta politics. And so my graduation weekend, we had our third current or former elected official go under indictment. And our then governor's chief of staff asked me when I got off the bus in Thomasville, Georgia, what are you guys putting in the water up there? And I'm like, that's it. That's the straw that broke the camel's back. I'm going to run if a position comes available. Well, our current mayor at the time left to take a job as Southeast Regional Director for HUD. And so I didn't know I was supposed to go kiss the ring or anything. I thought, I've had plenty of leadership positions, and so I'm just going to run. And I didn't know that I was supposed to go ask people. So when I said I was going to run, I literally got called into a back room. It was not smoky, and told not to run because I hadn't paid my dues.
Right.
And I said, look, I've run small businesses. I've run a nonprofit. I've chaired boards of directors. I have all the leadership experience I need. So what's so different about being mayor? And I was told that no older people would vote for me, no Black people would vote for me, no young people would vote for me because young people didn't vote. And I'm super competitive. And I just looked at him and I said, look, I'm going to run it. I'm going to win if your guy's in the race or not.
And how old were you at the time?
37.
All right.
And so I'll tell you, Robin, what I think really our campaign was fun. And there was this energy around it because it was a bunch of 20 and 30 something year olds who knew nothing about politics, but it was like a party, and it was a very inclusive party. And just, I think the energy is what people came around. And so I won in a runoff in 2005 with 56% of the vote. I had no endorsements going into the general election. I was the only candidate that didn't, but I'm like, it's always to me been about connecting at the grassroots level.
And Deke, I think this is now really important for the audience to hear right now, also to give it context. And what party?
None.
There you go.
And that's the thing. And you and I discussed in our conversation. So in Georgia, all local races are nonpartisan, municipal races and county commission races. And so I grew up, my dad was a conservative Republican, my mom a liberal Democrat, never voted the same way in a presidential election in over 40 years. And so I tell people I was brokering truces at the dinner table from the time I was old enough to talk. But I identified sort of as Republican growing up. I realized my views are just, I don't skew to either side. So running in a nonpartisan race was great for me. And I think Republicans in Augusta thought I was a Republican and Democrats thought I was a Democrat, whatever, that's fine. But I think the unfortunate part, I've thought about this, is that oftentimes, even when races are nonpartisan, the mayoral candidates or mayors really identify with the party. And I think to a large degree, that's because they're looking at what comes after. Right. You know, I want to climb the political ladder. I never wanted to do that. And it was all about just, we needed new leadership from me. So that's sort of my history, is I have a history of going where I see the most need, whether it was running the land trust for 4 years, becoming mayor. That's what I do.
It's these beautiful three pillars I love is you forge trust, you solve problems, you lead. It's pretty simple. And you do that by your background from the age of 4 years old was by communicating in terms of priorities, challenges, and pain points of others and being a resource for them solving those problems. I mean, you had thousands and thousands of hours, days, and not thousands of years, but years of practice doing that. And so how's that then manifest? So you're a mayor, nonpartisan mayor, solving problems for years. What's next on that journey?
So I started a niche consulting firm to help solve problems with local governments and businesses, which was going well. I built a good client base, but then an opportunity came along to do a 3-hour-a-day radio show on conservative talk radio. Apparently the audience was not happy with Glenn Beck, and so they approached me. And I jumped at the opportunity because surveying the landscape, locally and nationwide, I'm like, we're in real trouble when the people don't trust politicians and they don't trust the media. Right. So who do they trust? And I thought Augusta needs a trusted voice. So I did that for about a year. And ironically, the sales manager let my assistant know that my show made more money for him than Glenn Beck's did. Uh-huh. But it was not typical talk radio. We had live music, local music every Wednesday. I had people from, Republican governor to, Chef Jose Andres and Al Sharpton. It was really good and people loved it, but it wasn't typical conservative talk radio. And personally, I don't listen to conservative talk radio or liberal radio or watch that stuff because I'm like, why do I want to watch something or listen to something that's going to make my blood boil? Right. I wanted to teach people something. And it's interesting, Robin. So they said, well, let's change the format of your show. And you pick 3 controversial issues and you give your opinion on them, and then you ask your guests. And I'm like, I'm not going to ask musicians what they think about politics. But I said, I'm bringing on subject matter experts who know more about these topics than me, and that's the way it should be. And once again, I don't have all the answers. I mean, like everybody else, I have my opinions, but they then canceled the show and replaced it with Clem Beck.
Yep.
So then so I went back to the consulting work and built that back up. But then an opportunity to write a book came up. And I was approached by Forbes about writing a book. And the first thing I thought it was a joke or a scam. And so I almost deleted the email, but it turned out to be legitimate. And my first question was, where did you find me? So during my time in office, I'd been on a board, the Georgia Municipal Association, which sort of represents cities throughout the state. So I've been writing a leadership column for them for probably 3-4 years. So Forbes found the leadership column, which it really, but it's interesting, Robin, it's appealing to the middle is what I think I've always done. Did it in office, did it with the radio show. So my editor for Forbes, the first thing he said is, you're going to have to target a demographic. And I grew up a punk rock fan and have always been a little rebellious, which is good. Challenging the status quo takes being a rebel at times. But I thought, well, I didn't do that in office. I didn't do that with my radio show. I'm not going to do that with the book. So 6 months into the process, and it was kind of just plug and play, putting in all the leadership columns and figuring out where they fit. But my editor said, you know what, this is going to really appeal to a broad base of people. And I thought, bingo. But when the book first came out, I had a lady that's a friend of mine who is African American. She's the vice chair of the local Democratic Party. She said, I love your book. My 18-year-old daughter loves your book. And you need to run again. And I'd vote for you, even if you ran as a Republican. And that same week, I had a guy who knows former President Trump come up to me and he's like, I just love your book, and just went on. And I'm like, do I tell him that the vice chair of the Democratic Party feels the same way? But I think sometimes to seek common ground, and it's what I've done my entire adult life, you have to become the common ground.
Yeah. And what we think politically is such a very small part of the whole of a human being.
Yeah.
And so you call it the Changemaker, and you you have 7 attributes of a Changemaker. Want to highlight a couple for us?
Creativity is one of them. Courage is one of them.
All right. So I'm going to stop you on that one. Let's start with creativity. That's a tough one. How do you be creative?
Well, as I say, just with problem solving is all about creativity, and things are not just black and white.
Right.
But to solve problems, you have to come at it from every angle. So being creative is important in solving problems, in your outlook in life, in keeping an open mind. And I always share with kids, I'm like, remember, a mind is like a parachute. It works best when it's open. But once again, just keeping an open mind is so, so important. And I think really, to me, I realize now that I'm more interested in learning than I ever have been in my life.
Right.
And I think that to approach life with that creative curiosity is how we grow as people. And I tell people, I'm like, and so how do you grow as a person if you're only around people that look and act and think like you?
Right.
And I just, during my time in office, I viewed Augusta as my palette, and just bringing in new businesses and building buildings and everything. I took a creative approach to governing.
So creativity, as you said, requires an open mind and openness. Can you teach that, especially with someone as they're older?
I think you can, but they have to be willing to learn.
All right.
And some people's minds you're never going to change, and you have to realize that.
Do you have a strategy for how you start that process?
Yeah, well, here again, I'll give you a great example. So I've, and this is a creative bent as well. Somebody asked me at one point, what if Augusta was a food, what would it be? And I said it would be a gumbo because everybody knows you can't make gumbo with one ingredient.
Right.
So I had the opportunity, and we can talk a little bit about the nonprofit that I'm a founding partner with, Starts With Us.
Right.
But I had the opportunity a couple of weeks ago to come downtown. They're doing Starts With Us. Starts With Us is a nonprofit that's a national nonprofit trying to get us away from the polarization issue through us all committing to treating each other. I mean, it starts with us, with curiosity, compassion, and courage to have the difficult conversations. So they wanted to do Starts With Us on the street. I came to our farmers market, probably 1,000 people. It's grown so much, very diverse. I spent 5 hours interviewing people about what they thought about polarization, about, what I want to see more blank in America and less blank. And so it's like, I want to see more love and less hate. I want to see more unity and less division. And from people from all walks of life, I had Mexican immigrants, older African American people, younger African American people, girls in their 20s with blue hair. But it was a creative, and I said I'm all about grassroots engagement, but it was a creative way to show that we're not as divided as people think we are.
So you go do this great, beautiful experiment where you talk to a massively diverse group of people, and you got an overwhelming number of people that are saying that their number one priority or top priority is unity, correct?
Yeah, absolutely. And just here again, I think it's my being able to open up to people and making them feel safe in talking to me.
That is
It's
key.
what I do on my podcast, The Changemaker. It's what I did on my radio show. But I don't do gotcha.
Right.
And so people are always very comfortable in opening up to me. But yeah, it was just across the board. And it's interesting, Robin. So it was also done in San Francisco and San Antonio. And I talked to the young man that conducted the interviews in San Francisco. And he said basically he got the same answers that I did in Augusta, Georgia.
So what stands in the way? I think we can all agree. All our issues are common. They're all exactly the same issues. What stands in the way of people coming together with that, do you think?
I think it's being provided forums where they're comfortable expressing their views, in a safe place. And so there's a great organization called Bridge USA that's on college campuses. I think they have 50 chapters now, where college students, because they realize that politically the route that we're going on now is not sustainable.
Right.
And they're like, well, the generation before us really screwed it up. So we're the ones that need to fix it. So it's not a moderate group. It's not a conservative group, a liberal group. It's just a group of, students willing to come together to have the difficult conversations about how do we solve the big picture problems in our nation. And, I'm so excited about that portion of the bridging, movement. And there is a bridge movement. Not a lot of people realize that it's out there because you don't see a lot in the mainstream media about it. They've got a good game on social media, but with Bridge USA, there's now Bridge Europe and Bridge Africa. So that shows me if you provide these spaces and these forums and these platforms for people to go to, they'll go to them. And it's the same thing. My running for mayor was an experiment in democracy.
Right.
Because I thought and I never thought I'd use my political science degree, because I thought after I got my degree, I told people one thing that getting a political science degree made me realize is we'd have to have a revolution to change things. But so I thought, well, if I run and I provide an alternative and I'm positive and I'm a bridge builder and I seek solutions, I provide solutions to problems, I think people will go to that. And they did. But as, Starts With Us pushes out there further and further, and Bridge USA, it's going to give people an opportunity to come together on common ground. But two, go to your local farmers market. I love talking to people where they are. So, I've traveled a lot since COVID hit, really. I mean, I've been Virginia, Florida, South Carolina, was just in Nashville, St. Louis, and I love to talk to your average man or woman on the street. And we're not so divided, and they feel the same way we do. But I'm so glad I got 100 minutes worth of interviews that we can reflect that and show that. Because if you're only watching the mainstream media or social media, yeah, it gives the appearance that we're horribly divided. But my hundreds of friends at the farmers market would say that we're not.
Or at least we don't want to be. There's no doubt there.
We don't want to be. And I tell people, I'm like, I'm just an old hippie at heart. I want to unite the tribes. But so people have asked me, what are you doing now? And I say, I've got a podcast. I'm still doing keynote speaking. But I said, what this has done, becoming a founding partner with Starts With Us, gives me a platform to where I can be a part of doing at the national level what I did at the local level. And that is exciting for me. And that's why I say, I think, any experience is good or bad. God has spent 54 years preparing me for this moment. I honestly believe that. And we serve a uniting God. I'm like, and people don't want to be made to feel afraid of their neighbors. I don't think. I mean, most people, I think good leadership is about making people feel safe, secure, and that their voices are heard and that they matter.
Pretty simple, pretty basic. Deke, what are the first steps people should do to find out more about your tremendous treasure trove of information about you? Where should they go?
Yeah. So my podcast is the Changemaker podcast. You can go to augustapodcast.com and find that. Actually, we've just developed a website for that as well. I'm on LinkedIn. I'm on Instagram. Just Google Deke Copenhaver, because I think I'm the only Deke Copenhaver in the world.
And everything will be in the show notes for everyone. So check out the links.
And you can find me. And I'll tell you something funny, Robin. So I was telling somebody, I gave one of my books to a young man in Columbia, South Carolina yesterday. But he said, well, I'll read it and I'll report back to you and I'll critique it. I'm like, well, that's what I want you to do. I said, but I'll let you in on a little secret. My phone number is in the back of the book, and the website for the book is deke-copenhaver.com. But it's been out since, it's been out for 3 years now. It came out in 2019. Only one person, it's my personal cell phone number. Only one person has called it. And because I think nobody would be crazy enough to put their personal cell phone number in their book. But the guy's like, oh, it's really you. I'm like, yeah, man, what's up? So I'm easy to find.
That is pretty unique, putting your cell phone in the back of the book. Brave and transparent and definitely vulnerable, which inspires that trust we were talking about so much. Deke, what's something that I forgot to ask you that you wanted to make sure we shared before we signed off?
I think you've covered everything, but I want to give, just for your listeners, because you mentioned transparency. And that is absolutely key to being a good leader. But I was speaking this is just a real world quick story. I was speaking for a Master's of Public Administration class at Augusta University. And a young man used to be a cameraman for one of our local TV stations. And he said, your door was always open when you were in office, and we could always just walk right in unless you were in a meeting. He said, but the current administration, I've never made it past the lobby. Why was being transparent so important to you? I said, because in leadership positions, if you start limiting access to the public or the media, even if you've got nothing to hide, you're giving the appearance that you do. So transparency builds trust.
Yep.
So that's one more thing. And that's just a real world example that I've had experience with recently. That just shows me, I mean, it just transparency builds that trust.
I couldn't agree with you more. Transparency. That is the easiest ticket to move forward, because then you're open, you're honest, you're transparent, which empowers people with the knowledge they need to make decisions in their lives, which makes it about them, which gives them a feeling of safety and security and control. So that's why it works so well. It's a beautiful thing to do. And it's so easy. Just be honest and transparent.
Well, and leadership is not about power. It's about empowering.
Yes.
and lifting up the people around you. And it's been so cool. So many people that have worked with me through the years have gone on to great careers. I tell people, I'm like, I train them up and then they go make the money that, they should be making. But that's a wonderful thing to see. And it is, we should be lifting each other up, particularly
100%.
during these times.
100%. So, Deke, thank you so much for coming on the show, sharing this amazing insights. And everyone, check out the show notes. Go to these amazing sites for Deke. He's pretty easy to find, like you said. And I challenge you to give him a call.
Yeah. Well, they can find my cell phone number out there too.
All right. Deke, thanks again for coming on, and we'll talk to you very soon.
Robin, it's been a pleasure. Thank you for having me.
Thank you for tuning in to another episode of Forged by Trust. If you took away at least one new idea, make a note of it and pass it on to someone else who may need it. If you're interested in more information about how I can help you forge your own trust building and communication interpersonal strategies for yourself or your organization, please visit my website at www.peopleformula.com. I'm looking forward to sharing my next Forged by Trust episode with you next week when we chat with Lane Knighting and discovering the way of the hero.